Hello and welcome to the St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles podcast. Each episode will bring you the latest news from the St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles, as well as fascinating interviews with entertainment personalities, government leaders, and community advocates. St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles, where Scotland meets the City of Angels. Let's get started. Our guest today is Martin Compston. Hailing from Greenock, Scotland, Martin Compston is a well-known actor starring in iconic roles such as Detective Inspector Steve Arnett in the BBC drama Line of Duty, Lord Bothwell in Mary Queen of Scots, Peter Manuel in Plain Sight, and the upcoming Amazon Prime thriller The Rig, to name a few. We caught up with Martin during his busy shooting schedule in this engaging conversation about his career and of Scotland. Our co-host today is Blair Mowat, who was born and raised in Edinburgh, Scotland. Blair is a BAFTA-nominated composer for film and television and was nominated for a Creative Scotland Award for Best New Talent in the Scottish Arts.
Hi there, Martin. How you doing? Thank you so much for joining us today.
No bother, man. Thanks for having me.
Great. So first off, let's go right back to the start. You started in the entertainment business with the Ken Loach film, Sweet 16. How did that all come about?
A lot of it by chance. So I think I auditioned. So there was open auditions at my high school. But there was kind of a lot of events prior to that. You know, I was always interested in acting in terms of I love movies. You know, I think a lot of kids are in their heads. You know, I was obsessed with Indiana Jones when I was a boy, and
I was
too.
Yeah,
he's the ultimate man, and had my fedora and my leather jacket, or I think it was my mum's old leather jacket, which was a bit oversized for me, and I refused to answer to any other name other than Indy for like a year or two.
Right.
So it was something that was in my head, but just it was being from where I'm from. It wasn't something that you ever thought was a viable career, you know, for somebody who was working class. And just purely by accident, I was on a double date with a friend of mine, and whatever movie we went to see, we missed the show, and I'm sure it was some blockbuster, and we saw My Name is Joe by accident. And it just changed my whole idea of what cinema could be, because I'd never heard people who spoke like me or who looked like me on a big screen. And, you know, I didn't know we could do that kind of thing. And then I found out it was the guy who did Kess, Ken Loach, and my dad loved Kess, and we used to watch. There's a hilarious football scene and a very famous kind of comic scene where this very competitive PE teacher is teaching the class, but he's just cheating and making himself the hero and taking all the penalties and scoring all the goals. And my dad would watch it on repeat. And then just by chance, that guy was casting for a film in my area, and a good friend of mine, a guy called Gary Harkins, who went on to have a very successful professional football career. His dad was our deputy head and our PE teacher. And he came to me and said, look, we've had this note in for the teachers, and there's these casting directors and they're looking for this kid. And he says, I think it's you. I think you should go along. Now, in hindsight, I know that probably means a cocky little bastard. But yeah, but I'd be forever grateful for that, because as well, I was really nervous of like talking about going to an audition, and, you know, kind of thought I was probably one of the cool kids running around, and acting certainly wasn't something that was considered cool. And he made some of the football team go along with me. And I did the audition, and it went really well, and then got another audition, because I think it becomes this sort of myth and fable with Ken Loach, because he's such a magnificent director and he casts a lot of actors, but he also casts a lot of unknowns, and there's these ideas that grow, like you're walking down the street and somebody goes, you know, it really doesn't work like that. You know, I was 5 or 6 auditions to get the part, but yeah, and then it just went from there. But I didn't really think. I did the movie and then signed my pro contract for Greenock Morton, my local football team, at the same time, and I didn't think much to it until the very next thing, because Ken does very minimal ADR and stuff, so you don't really see much of the film. Whereas now, any project I see it sort of months before it comes out, and you get a sense of it's good. With that, I had seen very little, and then we went to Cannes Film Festival, and then all of a sudden you're on the red carpet with hundreds of photographers and you're like, oh, wow, what's going on here? You know, it's usually the last one, to be honest. And I
Right.
know that sounds, there's definitely times when you take stock and go, that was a particularly tough job. But I don't know why, but a lot of the roles I play or people come to me with tend to have an emotional edge to them. But I've just done a show for BBC One called Mayflies with a great friend of mine called Tony Curran, who's another who's an LA based Scot. And Tony, when I went to LA for pilot season, I slept on Tony's floor. So I owe him a lot. He looked on his kitchen floor. He looked after me. He charged me for it, right enough, but he really looked after me out there, and he still kind of looks after me to an extent. And he's a wonderful big actor. But we did this book called The Mayflies, which is based on a wonderful Scottish author called Andrew O'Hagan's, sort of loosely based on his upbringing. And it's about two old friends split in two timelines. And there's a young me, and that was heartbreaking to have a young me. And lovely Ryan, who was playing me, he's 25, and that was a lot to take. But
your idea of a young you is like 10, right?
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I thought when I saw the script. I went, "Oh, am I going to play the young me?" And I went, But the tail end of the book is it's about assisted dying, and it's about this journey that two sort of soulmates, really, two friends go on together. And doing that with one of your actual close friends was incredibly charged. It's the most present I've ever been in terms of an emotion on a job, because I've probably done just as emotional stuff, but you use different mechanisms to get there, whether you're thinking about different things of your past, or because also there's times where it just isn't happening for you, you're just not relating to it. What is that? I was just reading the words. You know, the scripts are so good, and the material is so charged that you're just in it, you know. And I'm really intrigued to see it come together, because the problem with that stuff is when you do really emotional things and everybody's crying on set, and you'll think, oh, this is amazing, we're all crying. But when you put it all together, does it work as a story? You know, because it might be emotional to you guys all in a day, but people might go, Jesus Christ, man, you've been crying for an hour now. Give us a break. Give us some light. So you've got to see it. But hopefully that's what the young team bring to it, or in the other timeline. The young guys were fantastic. But obviously we're not filming that stuff. So we just read it and watch them and try and take a sense of it. But hopefully it blended together. But yeah, there's been other jobs that took probably more out of me in more of a negative way, where I felt my head was in a bit of a dark place by the time I finished it. This took a lot out of me, but in the best possible way. We kind of felt there was a wonderful Ashley Jensen as well. Myself, Ashley, and Tony, and the lovely Tracy, who played my wife in it. I felt like the four of us were on a little journey together. As I say, it was tough stuff to film, but I'm excited to see it to come together. But I mean, it's over to the editors now. It's out of my hands. Well, the hardest thing with that as well is, especially if you're working on something with special effects and you're reading it and then you're reacting it and you're doing your wide-eyed, terrified or whatever it may be, and then you watch it a year later and you go, oh, that's what I was supposed to be scared of. And that's quite hard. You know, like if I could have seen that. But then you can't, I mean, that's why you're an actor, you know, you're supposed to imagine these things, and some of these things you're seeing aren't real, whether it be, I don't know, aliens or earthquakes or something. They can't throw you in the middle of an earthquake and film it. But, you know, if you could get a sense of it, or you could see it first in the way it's going to look, and then you could react to it, it's quite tough when, but again, that's the suspension of it. You know, you've got to just commit and do what you can. But yeah, it can be really rough when you watch it. You're like, oh, if I saw that, I'd have done that differently.
Yeah. Hopefully it's got easier then, because when this technology first came about, like when they were doing the Star Wars prequels and stuff, I think people really struggled to understand, you know, how it was all going to transform. But I guess now that we're more used to CGI, at least you know when it's like a green tennis ball on the end of a stick that
there's something coming.
Something decent is going to come at the end of it, you know, and it's gonna probably look good.
But then there's the one inside that I did a film which I thought was a cracking wee script called Wild Country. It was like a Scottish kind of werewolf film, and I just kept saying, and they had this massive sort of wolf puppet head that would snap at your. Some guy would just do that and snap it at your feet, but it was really, and it was some poor guy who was in this animatronic werewolf suit, and the thing weighed a ton, so he couldn't move. He was exhausted. So getting killed by this thing was slightly embarrassing. It was so slow, but they kept telling you it'll be great in the edit. It'll be different in the edit. Like when film comes out, that won't be it, and then that was it.
Oh,
it was like getting chased by a big slow teddy bear, and that again, but that was the limits of the time. But it's a shame because you knew it was a brilliant wee script and a great wee team, but yeah, just the budgets. But as we were saying there, it's you have to put your faith in them, and sometimes it pays off, and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, I have to find this movie. I have to find this movie
and
watch it.
There's a couple of things I've been in that like it's really good up until that point because it's all in darkness, but until you have to see it and then you go, no.
I live for stuff like that. I'm a huge horror fan, and cheesy like payoffs like that are right up my alley. Like,
well, you'll enjoy it. Wild Country.
So you played a role of Peter Manuel in the series In Plain Sight, and you played it with a lot of confidence and wit, and it's quite different in demeanor from some of the other characters you played. So how did you prepare for that role, and what was it like playing that sort of character?
That, especially at that kind of point in my career, was probably the bravest decision I'd ever made in terms of how I was going to play it. I say people tend to come to me with emotional stuff and playing. I mean, he was a monster, you know. He was horrible, irredeemable. I mean, there's no words to describe really what that man did and the devastation he caused to so many different families. And actually, bizarrely, he had this iconic bouffant, and I got married 2 days before we started shooting, so I had to kind of have my hair in that stance, so that didn't go down too well with the wife. I just about got away with it. But I had this thing, you know, I was listening to his tapes in prison and reading a lot of transcripts and reading all the books I could lay my hands on, and there was so many different facets to him as a man. You know, I mean, first and foremost, he was just a serial killer. He was a murderer, but he had this incredible memory and this incredible talent for speaking. You know, and the thing was, when he said he could lie and he could lie, but he'd always remember his first lie, so he could always sort of cover his tracks to somewhat. And he defended himself in court, got himself off in several times. He loved the drama of it all, and in some ways, that's why he got himself caught, because he couldn't. You know, he couldn't handle that some other people were getting credit for his offences. You know, in some ways it was as if he wanted caught. But he had this really unique handwriting, which I think the more looked at some like psychopaths do. And I was in my head, I think this is going to be really dark. I'd said to my family and friends, I'm going to need to switch off for a while. And so I was in the room trying to copy his handwriting, getting into this dark space. But the more I read out about it, is he was a bastard and he had no empathy. It wasn't really, I think, that dark. It wasn't a big deal to him to do what he was doing. So I just thought in my head, I'm not going to go really into a dark place and try and play this as menacing. I'm going to have fun with it, because I think that's what he did. He enjoyed it all. He really did get a kick out of all of it, not just the despicable things he was doing, but all the attention that came with it. You know, he thrived on it. So I just sort of leaned into that, just, you know, the way he walked, the way he talked, sort of, you know, the way he looked at people and all those different things, which is a bit of a leap of faith for me, because I think in terms of, because I made it more technical rather than mental, which I sort of is my comfort zone. When I feel myself getting worked up or emotional or angry or funny or whatever it may be, I feel I'm connected to it. Whereas with that, I felt really disconnected to everything. So I wasn't sure how much. You've just got to have John Strickland, who was the director, has directed me several times now. He directed me in Line of Duty, directed me in Plain Sight, and he's directed me in The Rig. And he's one of the people in this industry I trust the most, and I think he gets the best out of me. I know I drive him mad at times with the amount of questions I have, but you know, he knows a way to calm me down and stuff. So I trusted trusted John and just gave it a shot. And when you've got a wonderful cast around you as well, you know, who are helping you, and they're also, because that's one of the big things in acting is which I don't think sometimes actors forget is playing status. You know, if a joke's not funny on the page, but it's supposed to be funny, when the other actor says it, you laugh your ass off. You make it funny. You know, if somebody's supposed to be scary, you make them scary. It's the people around you reacting who do so much of the work for you. So when you've got a wonderful cast around you who are helping you in that aspect, yeah, as I says, it was I felt it was the boldest decision I'd made to that point, and I think it paid off.
Before we get to today's work plan, I know some of you have been waiting for your ride home, but you're going to have to wait a while longer.
How long, Magnus?
Until there's a ride available, we all have work to do.
Power outage across the accommodation block.
Could it have been seismic?
Well, we keep punching holes in the earth. Eventually, it's going to punch back.
Hold on!
Just can't get back down here!
It'll come back.
Push it, Alwyn. Shut it down.
Oh my God.
Kinloch Bravo to Coast Guard. I repeat, Kinloch Bravo to Coast Guard.
There's no radios, there's no phones, there's fog, these shakes. What is going on out here?
This'll split the crew.
They're already split.
This ain't normal. We all know it, but we don't want to see it.
Since the fog came in, some of our crew have had a psychological difficulty.
What's happening?
That's what you get for diving into the abyss.
Nature isn't a balance, it's a war.
I'm telling you, he's trying to warn us. We're all finished.
Wake up! He's got to be dealt with!
My job
Is to get you all home.
You don't negotiate with nature.
You're all being reckless!
It isn't something new. It's something old. And it's waking up. We're listening now.
So you mentioned The Rig earlier, which is an upcoming Amazon Prime season, and that was filmed at the First Stage Studios in Edinburgh, which I think is the first production to be shot there. Is that right? Yeah. So did you feel sort of part of sort of Scottish history in the making there, sort of being the first thing to film at this brand new studio?
I think no, because there's a couple. It's an incredible thing. Like obviously with our locations, we've always been a magnet for people to come and film, but it's always it used to be they'd come for the 2 weeks, do locations, and then leave and do the studio work elsewhere. And as somebody, you know, as a passionate Scotsman who's worked in Scotland most of life, I've always been very aware and shouting just how talented our crews are, you know. So the fact that there seems to be studios springing up now all over the place, which is amazing. And not only are people coming to do stuff that was set in Scotland and doing the location stuff and doing the studio stuff in Scotland, there's now stuff that is set all over the world, but they're just coming to film in Scotland, which is amazing, regardless of where it's set, just because of our studios and our infrastructure, which is amazing, and that can only be a good thing. It's a great thing. I do believe if you have the opportunity, I'm very aware that not everybody does, but if it's a big world out there, get out there, experience it, experience different cultures, take it all in. But I mean, home always calls you back, and I think it's definitely, keeping the talent in Scotland is a massive thing. You know, I really do think in giving them the opportunity to work on big shows at home, like Outlander's done amazing things. I think Amazon are setting up camp there now in Leith in the studios. We've just worked, I know, straight after our show, another show went in, and I think another one goes in. So no, I'm absolutely chuffed to bits to be part of that, and been very lucky the last couple of years. More and more of my jobs have been set in Scotland, and long may it continue.
Absolutely, and I especially in the last few years, I've seen the Scottish film industry really just like burgeon and become a different place in terms of the amount of stuff being made there. I feel like things have really kicked off in a way that back when I was in my early 20s, it was very different, and it felt like you did end up going down to London, you know, to try and seek out work and stuff like that. But there's loads of Scottish stuff being filmed.
Yeah, I mean, I think did we just had Indiana Jones? I think The Flash was there.
Right, there you go. Yeah,
we won't talk too much about Batgirl.
Oh yeah, I know that was all filmed in Scotland.
All of it. I mean, I know, but that's the heartbreaking thing for that. You know, a lot of on my last job, a lot of the crew were on it, and they all said they had a great time. You know, they really enjoyed it. The cast were all lovely. Yeah, so I don't know what happened there, but yeah, it feels like there's a lot of sort of blockbusters coming, which is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think bits of the Batman were filmed as well. The most recent
you know, up at the old the cemetery in Glasgow, wasn't it? The
Necropolis.
Necropolis.
Glasgow makes a good Gotham, I think.
It really does, and
it's
the
color of the stone. I think, you know, the oldness.
Because they have all those wonderful old buildings. I mean, I think was it World War Z was in George Square for Philadelphia.
Right. Yeah. I had a friend who worked on that actually. Yeah.
And I think it's the same because in Indiana Jones, you see the ticker tape parade going up. I think it's Hope Street or something. But the wonderful thing about Glasgow is you have all these incredible buildings, and then you drive 10 minutes, but 20 minutes out of town, and you're at Loch Lomond.
Right.
You know, we have everything on our doorstep there to make it a success. So I said I'm delighted to the way it's going right now, and we just need to keep going with it.
Great. What would you like to see out there as far as film production? I know we're talking about blockbusters being made as well as some smaller projects. If you had your kind of wish and somebody said, hey, what would you love to see be made out there?
Well, there's one particular thing I've been working on myself, which I'm co-producing with World Production to make Line of Duty. And it's a story that's fascinated me for a long time. I can't believe it hasn't been made before. It's pretty epic in scale. It's about a guy called Alan Pinkerton, whom I know people will be familiar with the name, the Pinkerton Detectives. The Pinks are always the baddies in all the old cowboy films. But him as a man was extraordinary. He was from the Gorbals in Glasgow. He was a Chartist, which was fighting for workers' rights, and then got chased out of Britain by Queen Victoria's government as a traitor, landed in Nova Scotia where his boat sank. I think they got robbed when they got off the boat, made themselves to Dundee in Illinois, where he was a cooper by trade, and then accidentally stumbled across these counterfeiters, busted them, became the local sheriff, then became the first detective in Chicago, then became Abraham Lincoln's right-hand man, started the Secret Service, blew up Jesse James's house, chased Butch Cassidy. He worked, man was just full of contradictions, which I loved. He worked on the Underground Railroad. So he was supposed to be upholding the law, but he was hiding runaways in his basement and helping them get north to Canada. He once caught these, I think there's a famous story where I think it was the Reno gang where they caught them in Canada and they were bringing them back across ferry, and the ferry sank, and he made all his detectives handcuff themselves to one of the perpetrators. So if they drowned, you drowned. But then when he got them back, let them all be hung. It's like, what was the point? You know, but he full of these contracts. He was an incredible man with an incredible life, and his impact he still has a massive impact today on culture today. You know, the Pinkerton Detective Agency is still going, but he was like a real life Sherlock Holmes. He was the forerunner of, I think he built the first sort of rogues gallery in America. He was the first guy to use, he employed the first female detective. He had disguises, undercover agents. They all had, in the Civil War, they were the main undercover agents for the Union. The guy's life was just epic, you know. And
wow.
So that's my dream, to make that, you know, I'd love to make it, whether it be between Scotland and America.
Yeah,
I would love to do that, but it's a quite huge undertaking. It says you're talking about something would have been in the 1850s, 1860s, I think, in You've got
Right.
Civil War to incorporate and all that, but it's kind of a thing that could feel like it could run as a series. But I think he's been touched on, and because unfortunately after his it was the Homestead strike, which the Pinkertons broke up and I think killed a load of union workers. But that was after I think Alan Pinkerton had died by that point, and his sons had taken over and made it more into a corporate sort of enterprise, whereas he was a union man and wouldn't take on cases to break up unions. So his name is kind of synonymous with that strike and sort of badness. But a lot of that stuff happened after his death.
So that's amazing that you're getting involved in the production side of stuff as well. There, are you sort of helping with like the scripts and stuff like that, and sort of?
So I wrote the treatment. It's
Right,
just something
amazing.
that's been on my my mind. Like I kept coming back to it because I remember, because I was always fascinated. I loved old cowboy films. I used to watch it with my dad and stuff, and so I was always aware of the Pinkertons. And somebody told me he was Scottish when I was younger. I couldn't get my mind around that, and I started looking him up and just devoured all these books about him and looking around. And I just, it's a story I can't believe hasn't been told in more detail. Because it's the kind of thing, in some ways, the problem I had, there was just too much. There was too much material. I was like, where do you start this thing? Do you start it when he was fighting Queen Victoria's forces, or do you start it when they arrive and they're robbed, or you start it at the Civil War? Do you start it with Jesse James? It's just like there's so much going on. So I just wrote my treatment, and luckily I've got great representation in America, Anonymous Content, who do really good stuff, and my manager's there. I've been telling about them and said, look, why don't you just write it? Because I'm not a writer. It's writing is an incredible discipline, an art form. I mean, I can see scenes in my head and I know what I want to do with it, but when I sit down and go, it was a misty, foggy morning with the owl, I go, oh, Martin, shut up. I bore myself. So I can write out the kind of idea of where I want the story to go, and I can see it in my head, but it's a real discipline to be able to sit down and write 120 pages or whatever it may be. So I sent in my treatment to World, and who have been a huge part of my career through Line of Duty and things like In Plain Sight and Great Train Robbery, and they've been a great collaborator with me over the years, and luckily they went for it and found me a fantastic writer who's wrote some incredible films and screenplays over his time. So yeah, it's I'm really excited by it. It's probably the most, seeing that side of it, and also just how laborious it can be at times and frustrating and slow, how the wheels turn when you just want to get things done. It's not that easy. As an actor, you get the call, do you want to do it? You start in a couple of months and then you do your job and then you move away. From start to finish, this will take, before I even get on set, it'll probably be a minimum of 5 years I've been working on this. Yeah. And this has actually been quite a quick turnaround, people have been saying.
So Line of Duty is obviously a huge success back in the UK. I mean, it is national event television in a way that some other dramas aren't. I'm not really aware of in America how much of that actually sort of transfers across. So do you find that you meet Americans who watch it out here, or are you not recognized as much in the States?
Not nowhere near as much. Where it's changed after last series back home, where it's sort of you. And don't get me wrong, I'm very grateful for it, but you're public property, sort of everybody kind of knows you. But no, here it's more a novelty, which I do enjoy. It's quite funny when you're walking down the street and people double take, because it's like, if I'm walking down the street in Vegas, like, why is he here? They're not sure if it's me or not. LA, it's obviously industry people, so it's a bit more. In Vegas for sure, because there's a lot of tourists, but it's definitely more of a novelty here, which I enjoy. That's probably my favorite thing about being here, is the anonymity. You can go about your day, and this might sound strange to people when you're talking about Las Vegas, but the pace of life is so much slower for me out here. It's I just keep myself to myself and go about my day. It's a great place to unwind. So yeah, I love it here for that reason. But it's definitely, I think, with the streaming services, it's more people are seeing it for sure. But yeah, it's mad. I think Stephen King was tweeting us about it.
Really?
And we get these, the Fonts was tweeting us about it. We have all these kind of mad, I think Sarah Silverman, So you have all these kind of little kind of strange things that pop up, and yeah, it's lovely. It's nice to be out here, and I think unfortunately I wasn't out for it, but I think the last series they had his posters in Times Square and stuff, and and that's
right.
that's
Okay. Yeah.
that's boyhood dream stuff. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've watched it all actually. I think it's brilliant.
Cheers, man.
I've kept up with it, and yeah, you do a fantastic job. It really is. I do think it is, like I say, event television, and we just don't have that as much. You think about, I mean, things like Doctor Who, especially before BBC iPlayer and stuff. You get like 13 million people sitting down at the same time watching something, and I feel like Line of Duty, and also big sporting events as well.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Line of Duty as a drama is one of those few things that really
No,
does
mate, you're
get people
absolutely
all
right.
sitting
But I
down.
think what's been great for that is to show that is still doable. And I do think because there's something about that communal viewing. Because one of the great things for us is I mean, it got a bit out of hand, the last one, I have to say, but the frenzy and the build up to the next episode, is part of the anticipation, and nobody wants to miss it because they don't want a spoiler.
Right.
And I think that's one thing Jed has always said. He says, because people go and like drop all the episodes, we'll never do that with Line of Duty. It has to be, I mean, we might change different ways of filming it, but it won't all happen at once, because the anticipation of what's coming is half the fun, and people's theories I mean, all these podcasts spring up now, and they're really funny to listen to, and like in the build up, all these people theories, and you're like, shit, I never thought of that. That's pretty good. People come up with all these different things, but that's the great thing about it. But it shows there still is space for event TV, and if it's done right, it can happen.
Just going back to the rig, because obviously it's a big budget, big Amazon show. In terms of expectations for what we can maybe expect from that show, because I think it comes out in January. Is that right? In terms of,
I'm
when
not
it's
sure
dropping,
I can confirm or deny, but if that's
okay,
what you
cool. I've heard.
No,
It's,
but you can
I
go
think
with
I've
that.
heard it's coming.
I'm
I
happy
think I
for
heard
you
it's
to go
coming
with
out
that,
in
but as long as I don't confirm or deny.
Okay, cool. I think that's what I think that's out there in public.
Right.
Obviously, there's only so much you can say, but is there anything more that you can sort of tell us in a way to sort of get people excited about watching?
Well, yes and no, but because I wish. Look, again, it was something I touched on earlier. The marketing and the story has to get the hype around it so people will watch it. But I wish people could experience it the way I read it.
Right.
So John Strickland, who I mentioned before, my dad was a welder. My dad, he's still a welder, still works in the shipyards, but he used to work offshore on oil rigs. And when we were doing In Plain Sight, John we filmed a bit in my hometown of Greenock, and my dad came down with his pal, and they got talking and whatever. And my dad was telling me he used to work on oil rigs and stuff. And then cut to a few years later, and John phoned me, says, like, I've got this job coming up, this thing called The Rig. She says, a part I think you'd be great for. And I remember speaking to your dad about him working on oil rigs, and so he says it's a world you know. So I think you'd be great for this. So have a read and see what you think. I thought then it was going to be a story about these hard drinking, sort of tough men offshore, and domestic sort of people lives falling apart, because it's a tough life. My dad was quite lucky at that point. He'd family and settled, but I still have friends offshore, and a lot of people basically what they do is, because it was a good earner for people where we're from. If you had a trade, you could make a lot of money in those days, but they would basically come off 2 weeks of full on partying and then go offshore, dry out, and work for 2 weeks. It was a pretty full on lifestyle. So that's what I thought it was about. And then it just takes this left turn, man. And it's like I was reading it going, what is going on here? And it was brilliant to experience it like that. I was like, but I couldn't put it down.
Right.
So I mean, and it's really hard to put it in a box, which I think is a fantastic thing as well. I think the way they will go is sort of supernatural thriller, but there's so many different elements to it. And what David, again, I think I saw on your list, Dave McPherson was one of your previous guests.
Yes, he was.
Yeah,
lovely
David and I have actually spoken to each other a little bit over Twitter, because my agent actually put me forward for the rig because I'm Scottish, obviously, and I'm a sci-fi guy. I love sci-fi.
What, for my part or for the composer?
It's for the composer, not for your part.
I was like, oh, this is about to get really awkward.
Yeah.
No. He didn't steal a part off me. But I was like, surely this is a home run, Scottish sci-fi composer. But no, it didn't happen.
Didn't quite work.
But David and I spoke a little bit about it over Twitter and stuff. So yeah, he the writer, he seems great.
Well, what I love about script is it's got ambition. And I think that's a joy to be part of something that filmed in Scotland with something with such ambition. The scale of it feels epic. It's otherworldly. It's really hard to explain till you see it, and I'm sure there is, because everything's influenced by something to some extent. And I'm sure people will point out other jobs or previous things where there's this thing, but I've never seen anything like it. So to be part of that is really exciting, and it's a wonderful ensemble. So you don't feel like you're carrying it, which is great as well. There's so many different parts of the story. All the characters are so well developed. I'm excited. I'm intrigued. I think people will either absolutely love it or hate it. Which I don't think is a bad thing, because it gets people talking.
Yeah.
But it won't be boring. That's for sure.
Right.
It certainly won't be boring.
Are there any projects you worked on before that you wish there'd been a sequel to? Was there anything that was sort of cut off before its time, or something that was very successful but you can imagine a sort of another story coming out of that world?
I think with some things, I think these days there's definitely space for it, but originality is hard to come by. And there seems to be a remake or a prequel or a sequel to anything that's successful. I think sometimes you've got to be brave enough to let it be. I work with a brilliant Scottish writer called Nicole Taylor, and this job I'm very proud of called The Nest. And inevitably, when something goes down well critically and does good figures, there's always a clamour for another series. But what I loved is Nicole was very, from the outset, said this is a one-off, and there's a freedom to that, because you go, we've got to leave it all on the floor here, guys. Like, we're not going to get another chance at this, so you're fully committed. I think probably one that would intrigue me would actually be Sweet 16, because I mean, Paul will correct me if I'm wrong, but Paul Laverty, the writer, I think the idea formed, he was working with and meeting people who had recently got out of prison. And the story kind of worked back from there to go, like, how did somebody end up in that situation? Like, what was their circumstances? And out of that came the character Liam in Sweet 16. So we kind of talked about going, it'd be interesting to see where Liam would be now. Because of what happened, he'd probably be out of prison by now. And we spoke about, it'd be interesting to see where he would be in his life. But whether that's just an interesting conversation for us to have, or whether it's something people would want to see, I don't know. But yeah, I think there's a couple of things I've been lucky enough that have went down well, where people go, yeah, I should go again. But if you're just doing it for the sake of it rather than story purposes, then I think you can really end up, you don't want to damage a great original, which I think has been done several times, because you remember the terrible sequel rather than the great first one.
Yeah.
So you've got a reputation in the industry for being sort of a very sort of humble, down to earth guy, and you've been quoted as saying, "I'm not motivated by money at this stage of my life. I'm motivated by work." Which I actually myself was saying to somebody the other day about my composing stuff, because I was spending budget on an orchestra I didn't really have. But what sort of project would you like to sort of materialize for yourself in the future? And is there a sort of, how do you help sort of keep yourself, grounded sort of in the industry?
Did my agent write that for you?
No comment. No comment.
That might have been in an email. Yes.
No, look, see all that. I mean, I just be a good person. I think a lot of it, and as well, I think as well with the industry now, and that's one good thing about social media. People who are acting particularly badly or have done things that are very quickly called out now. So even I think before you could get away, people could get away with acting particularly bad on sets, but I mean, if you're a dick now, you're going to get found out pretty quick.
Yeah.
But no, I have no, like I mean, I enjoy having a laugh, I enjoy being around people, I enjoy finding out about people's lives and stuff. So I don't know, I think I am quite a curious person. You know, I just, as I say, and I like seeing other people doing well. You know,
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think there's any great secret to it. You know, just
I'm always amazed at how many people I hear all sorts of horror stories within the industry about certain people, like both behind the scenes and in front of the scenes, and I don't get it. I don't get it why it's that hard to just be like a nice person to people. Like, why are there so many? Why are there so many jerks?
Well, what I find is funny as well. Like, I always see people like, oh yeah, they're so fake bad, they're so fake or whatever. But I prefer somebody who was fake nice and trying to be nice and trying to change their demeanor. You know, yeah. I mean, at least they're making the effort.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But yeah, I think again there was part. I mean, I've always been the one thing actually. Just because this might be a bit of a tangent, but I got a letter from a note from a brilliant Scottish author called John Niven, and Alan Rickman's diaries have just come out, and he sent me a passage from one of his entries, and he wrote about me. And it really, really got to me because I met Alan one time 20 years ago at the European Academy Film Awards, I think it was. And I was in Rome. I was 18 years old. I was so out of my comfort zone. I felt lost. I lost the award. So when you lose the award, nobody's interested in you. And Alan, his kindness of that night, his kindness in looking after me and just taking an interest in me, I will never ever forget. And he wrote me a lovely note at the end of the night on the back of my invite. You know, just something very sweet. And I never knew if he knew it or if he meant it. It doesn't matter either way. If he was just being kind to be kind, that was wonderful. But he wrote a lovely note to me, and then this diary entry I found out was he kind of meant what he wrote on his note to me. But I never forgot that. I never forgot him, the way he treated me. And that's stuff that says, and he's one of the greats. You know, he's one of the greatest of all time. And if he can go out his way to help this little 18-year-old from Greenock, you know, feel at ease in those situations, then who can't? You know,
yeah.
And I really think, yeah, that's kind of stuff that stayed with me.
That is great. That is really nice to hear, and thankfully, yeah, I've experienced that sometimes when you meet people who are at the absolute top of their game, they usually are very nice. And actually, it's usually
nothing
people
to prove, you know.
Exactly, it's usually people with a bit of a chip on their shoulder, or they're a bit insecure that they start acting out, and you're like, well, that's not going to do you any favors, because like part of it is just being nice and being like easy to get on with, collaborative. Like that's all it is. That's half the job.
It's a lot of the time you start to learn, and I think as you get older and more comfortable in your own skin, I think I've got a bit more leeway with people like that, because you know it's their insecurities. You know, they're nervous and they're trying to project onto other people. So I think now I'm pretty good now when I can have a word with somebody and go, look, it's all right. You know, but you're on the job, you're fine. You know, you know, just let's get on with it. Whereas, but you're right. The seems the higher they go, it seems more people are they're usually sounder.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you could add anything to help Americans understand why it's important to support the Scottish entertainment industry, what would you tell our community?
There's a lot of history there. There's some deep, deep links going back, and I think that's important. I think that's stuff you want to keep alive. It's stuff that should be celebrated. You know, a lot of people probably left Scotland at times going to America searching of a better life and made a better life for themselves. But I think, you know, you've got to celebrate your history to an extent and stuff, and also remember that there's probably aspects of it that shouldn't be celebrated, but you know, it's our history nonetheless. And yeah, and I love it here. You know, I do feel there's a connection there, and I think I'm just a very proud Scotsman. I really am. And anything I can do to help us in any part of the world is great. But America is the Mecca. It's Hollywood, baby. This is where all where dreams are made. So yeah, I mean, I just hope anybody who could, and I'm very lucky to come across people who are sort of keeping the torch lit, and there's been strong connections there for a long time, and I just think just whatever we can do to keep them and strengthen them, then I'm all for it.
Very good. As a proud Scotsman, I completely agree.
Well, Martin, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Is there a website or anything that we can put out there so that people can stay on top of what you've got going on and know when the rig's coming out? Because I am like waiting here with bated breath.
Instagram now. Instagram does it all.
Yep, that's a good shout. Also, we did forget to mention the Firm, which is the whiskey bar that you set up downtown in LA. So people should go down, check out the Firm.
Check it out. I mean,
Martin's
a great guy
Whiskey
you
Bar.
should have on. You should definitely have on at some point. Is a brilliant friend of mine, Charles Liu, sort of lawyer, entrepreneur extraordinaire, who was born in Saltcoats.
Nice.
But very successful man down in LA, and so I chipped in with him a couple of quid. Certainly not as much as Charles and the rest of the investors did.
Okay.
But we have a whiskey bar called the Firm downtown in LA. So go down and check it out if you can. But yeah, I'm chuffed to somewhere I can go and run up a tab. I'm happy with that.
Nice. Fantastic.
Thank you, guys.
Well,
absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the St. Andrews Society of Los Angeles podcast. For more information on the St. Andrews Society of Los Angeles, visit www.standrewsla.org. And don't forget to like our Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube channels as well. Have a great week, and we'll see you next episode.